Thank you for joining me. We're on Daf Mem Gimel Amud Aleph 43a, the Mesechet Sukkah, where the Gemara in last week's share went through some quite intricate circuits to demonstrate the Torah position, also the rabbinical position in relation to the mitzvah Arba Minim, whether they can be taken on Shabbat or not, both in the Mikdash and also outside the Beis HaMikdash, where there is a difference in the halacha. Just very briefly, certainly as far as it concerns us for today's year, when it comes to the Beis HaMikdash, there's a special rule which we learn from the Pasuk in the Torah, Usamachtem lifnei Hashem Elokeichem shivas yomim, which means that in a sense there's a fuller celebration of Sukkot in the Beis HaMikdash than there is outside the Beis HaMikdash. That's the way Chazal understand it. In the Beis HaMikdash, or according to the Rambam, anywhere in Yerushalayim, there's a machlokes on this, that is considered to be lifnei Hashem. And there it's Shivas Yomim. That means that the din of Lokachtem Lochem, of taking the Lulav and Esrog, is a 7-day mitzvah, min ha-Torah, in the Beis HaMikdash, or according to the Rambam, everywhere in Yerushalayim. Outside the Beis HaMikdash, which is not considered lifnei Hashem, in other words, it doesn't comply with the Pasuk end, which says there should be 7 days. Then we just look at the beginning of the Pasuk. It says, "O lekachtem lachem b'yom harishon," creates hadar b'chapos, tomorrow, etc. So the mitzvah of Arba Minim outside the Beis HaMikdash is only a 1-day wonder min ha-Torah. Really, it's a 1 day only, and it's not at all like Sukkah, which extends min ha-Torah for all 7 days. So that's the Torah position, but it's a 1 day only. The fact that we take it for 7 days is because on the other 6 days, we take it what's called Zeicha Mikdash, to commemorate what was done in the Mikdash. But the Min HaTorah rule, the basic rule Min HaTorah, is 1 day only outside the Beis HaMikdash. In the Beis HaMikdash, again, coming back to in the Beis HaMikdash, there was a 7-day mitzvah. And we learned that in theory, all 7 days, even if one of those days was a Shabbat, it would still be taken. You would take Lulav and Esrog even on a Shabbos. However, they narrowed it down, said it would be taken only if the first day fell on a Shabbat. The first day fell on a Shabbat, they would actually take Lulav and Esrog in the Beis HaMikdash. But if the second or the third day was, then it would have been different. But if the first day was Shabbat, as often happens, they would have taken the Lulav and Esrog, unlike us, of course. We don't take it on the first day, even if it's on Shabbat, even if it's on the first day, we do not take it. In the Beis HaMikdash, they would take it. And we went through a Mishnah that described actually how it was done, that they didn't carry it on the Shabbat itself, but they brought it on Friday afternoon. And then the next morning, they would pick up a random Lulav and Esrog because they wouldn't be able to find their own, and it would have been gifted to them, so to speak, in some general condition that anyone who picks up a Lulav and Esrog, it's as if it were their own, it is theirs, and they can make a broch on it. The Mishnah went on to say that led to a lot of fighting in the Beis HaMikdash. People wanted, if they could, to locate their own. And as a result of that, Chazal actually said, enough. Even though we should be taking the Lulav and Esrog on a Shabbat in the Beis HaMikdash, we're not going to let you do it here in location. Rather, you'll have to take it at home before you come in. None of this smash and grab anymore in the Beis HaMikdash to try and find your own Lulav and Esrog. Make the brocha at home, because it's leading to confrontation in the Beis HaMikdash. Nevertheless, it was taken. They took it at home. We don't even take it at home on a Shabbat, so there's still a difference. We ignore the mitzvah of Lulav and Esrog altogether. They had to take it at least to take it at home, because it was Doche Shabbat. It actually is override Shabbos, because it's a 7-day mitzvah there, which was to include whichever day of the week it was that it fell. So that's the situation. So again, ours is different. We never take on a Shabbos Minat Torah, it's really only on the first day, and on the other 6 days, it is Seichel Mikdash. We're going to take the Gemara from Mem Gimel Amud Aleph. You see where it is. If you count from the top of the page, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 lines, about a third of the way down, 15 lines from the top of the page. And it's the second word, de'issei. First word is mina, mem yud nun hey, and then de'issei, and the expression we're looking at now is de'issei minat Torah bigvulin min olam. Here, the Gemara actually asks a very, very basic question. How do we know that there is a mitzvah to take lulav on the first day even, outside the Beis HaMikdash? How do we know there's a mitzvah at all? How do we know we're doing a mitzvah at all on Sukkot? Maybe this whole mitzvah, you might think, well, what a ridiculous question. Haven't we had Sukkot for thousands of years? Don't we know that we all keep Sukkot, whether inside or outside the Beis HaMikdash? We do buy a lulav and esrog. What's the Gemara asking this question from here? How do we know we have to take it? There's a pasuk, but it's not as easy as that. The Gemara is being really very fundamental. I said to you that at the end of the pasuk, it says, that there was a 7-day mitzvah in the Mikdash. So the Gemara is saying, well, maybe we can learn the whole pasuk is referring to the Beis HaMikdash. Or maybe we should say that the mitzvah lulav and esrog is not for every Jew. We'll see this in a moment. So the Gemara actually asks a very, very fundamental question here. How do we know that there's even a one-day wonder mitzvah to take lulav and esrog outside the Beis HaMikdash? That's the Gemara's question. And the Gemara answers to Tanya because we've learned the following in a brisa. I'm going to share a screen with you in a moment. What the Gemara is going to do is bring a few words from the famous pasuk, and from those few words, it's going to try to derive a great deal of extraction of data from a very limited data file. How do we come to do this? We'll see this is a classic brisa that seems to presuppose that we understand how to look at every single letter and syllable in a word. And it's going to answer the question, how do we know that the lulav and esrog is taken even outside the Beis HaMikdash? If you read the brisa further over here, and then I'll show it to you on the screen because I'm going to look at it word by word. But let's read it as a whole first, so we get to see the pattern. The Tanya, because it was taught in a brisa, Ula Kartem, the pasuk says Ula Kartem. What does that mean? That means every Jew has to do his own mitzvah. Lochem, when it says lochem, what does the pasuk mean? Misha lochem. It has to be arba, meaning that belong to you. Lahotzi is asha, all of us are gozela. We've done this earlier on. To exclude, at least for the first day, doing the mitzvah on a borrowed or a stolen arba minim. Bayom, it says Bayom Harishon. What does the word Bayom mean? You might think it's very obvious, but the Gemara is going to extract extra information. The Afilu b'Shabbos, that even if that day, that first day falls on a Shabbos, it has to be on that day. We don't miss out that day. Rishon, what does the word Rishon mean here? Afilu b'Gvulin, this is difficult. This means that you take lulav and esrog even outside the Beis HaMikdash. How does the word Rishon, which means first, tell you that it's taken outside the Beis HaMikdash? You'll have to wait a moment. Horishon, here we have the hey, not just Rishon, it says Horishon. What does the hey mean? That's the definite article. Why doesn't it just say Bayom Rishon? Why does it say Bayom Horishon? Melamed, this is to teach us, She'eno docha ela Yom Tov Rishon bilvad. This is to narrow down the days in which lulav and esrog overrides Shabbos, just to the first day only. That's how the Gemara wants to learn it. And only on the first day, this is talking about Beis HaMikdash times, of course, only on the first day does the taking of lulav and esrog override Shabbos. But if Shabbos is on another day, then we would not take lulav and esrog on that other day. End of brisa. And now we've answered our question, but let's have a look at this a little bit more closely. And for that, I'm going to share my screen. Okay, sure you can see this. So here we are, Technicolor. Ulekachtem lochem b'yom harishon, says the pasuk. Right, and I've multicolored it because each of the color breaks represents a new phrase, which we're going to have a look at, covered by the brisa. This is the important pasuk. It actually says, "Ulekachtem lochem b'yom harishon pri eitz hodav v'kapos tamarim v'afei avos v'arvei nochel," etc., etc. "Usamachtem lifnei Hashem Elokechem shivas yomim," and you shall celebrate in front of Hashem 7 days. But the brisa here only deals with the first 4 words. "Ulekachtem lochem b'yom harishon." That's enough for it to extract a whole series of halachot. First one it extracts is this one. Ulekachtem, everyone takes individually. Yes, everybody, kol echad ve'echad, everyone has to take individually. Is that obvious? No. And it's very interesting because the commentaries bring other examples where there is a mitzvah which is not on each person in the community, but rather one that's directed towards the Beis Din. This ulekachtem is similar to another plural instruction. We have usafartem lachem b'yom ha'rishon sheva shabbos tamimus, the sefiras omer. How do we know we have to count omer? Because it says usafartem lachem. It says you shall count for yourselves the 50 days of the omer. And we understand that to mean everybody has to do their own counting. We don't leave the counting to the Rosh Beis Din on behalf of the whole city, for example. Everyone has to do their own counting. There are mitzvahs which are not mutal on the tzibur as individuals, but only on the leadership. This is one that is done by everyone individually. And it says ulekachtem, which is a similar form as usafartem. And just as safir is done individually, so lekicha has to be done individually, which means everyone has his own personal mitzvah. You don't rely on the rabbi making a mitzvah, shaking lulav and esrog, and then you just go home. You haven't done a mitzvah for that. He may make kiddush for you, but he can't take a lulav and esrog for you. So that's what it means, ulekachtem. And by the way, if you want this contrast again, we've just given the model of usafartem, where this safira of counting the omer is done for every individual. There is a contrasting phrase in the Chumash which says usafarta sheva shabsos timimimos. You shall count 7 complete sets of 7 years. The Torah talks about a counting of the Shemitah cycles in order to establish which is the Jubilee year. And there's a very similar to Sefartem Lachem on Sefiras HaOmer, which we all do on the 2nd day of Pesach until Shavuos. There's an equivalent in terms of counting all the 50 years. Each year, if you like, the Beis Din says this is the 6th year of the new Yovel cycle. This is the 32nd year. And who says it? We don't. No Jew in the street said it. That was a mitzvah, that was a mutal al ha-Beis Din. The Beis Din, in the same way as the Beis Din, we used to sanctify the new moon, and not each of us individually. When this was done by witnesses, it wasn't up to every man in the street to say, well, I haven't seen the new moon, it's not Rosh Chodesh yet. You relied on the sighting and the declaration of the Beis Din. That was a mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh, that was a mutal. It was only obligatory on the Beis Din. When they made their pronouncement, it was Rosh Chodesh. If they didn't make their pronouncement, it wasn't. When they count a year, it says Usafarta, then it's a year that has now passed. However, that's because the posset there is in the singular as far as counting of the years. Usafarta. So we understand that means you as an individual. Who's the you as the individual? It doesn't mean you as every individual. It means an individual so selected on behalf of the tzibur. In other words, the Rosh Beis Din or the Nossi, I'm not quite sure exactly who it was. He was the one, the chief rabbi. He would make that pronouncement of the year in the cycle. He would do that counting, usafarta. But when it's in the plural like this, it means people should, all of you, if you like, need to have a chelik in this mitzvah. So that's the way we understand the drasha, which emerges from the word ulekachtem. Everyone does it for themselves. And as you can see, it's not so obvious anymore that a mitzvah needs to be done by everyone individually. One has to look at the and see what the context is in the Chumash. And then we said lochem, lokachtem, lochem. Lochem means for you. And remember, this is the drasha we said many times before. It has to belong to you on the first day, because we're talking about Yom Rishon. It has to belong to you, which means that you cannot borrow a lulav and esrog, as we said, and make a broch on it unless it's gifted to you. Remember, we talked about it's a matana al manach lahachazir. That was a technique that was used. If you haven't got your own lulav and esrog on the first day, then it has to be gifted to you to make, and the person gifting to you essentially passes full possession of it to you until you do finish the mitzvah, at which point essentially it should revert to him. And if you don't give it back to him, not only are you a thief, but you also haven't fulfilled your mitzvah, because the mitzvah depends upon you fulfilling the full condition. It is yours, and then it needs to be returned. And if you haven't done the return, then you haven't even fulfilled the mitzvah. But it needs to be lochem. As we see, there's a technique to ensure that even if you haven't got your own, you can nevertheless, you can facilitate it. But it comes from that word lochem. The third word is bayom. So here we come to slightly more subtle darshonot. I mean, the first thing you'd think when you see bayom, what does that mean? Yom, the word day, we're being very, very fundamental. The word day can have two forms of interpretation. It could mean at day and not by night. And in many places, that's the way that we learn out the word by yom in a Chumash pasuk, that the mitzvah can only be done in the day and not in the night. And we will see in the Gemara that according to the sages, that is the correct interpretation of the word by yom here. It means day and not night. But by yom can also mean, when I say it's Yom Sheni, I mean it's Monday. I don't mean that it's daylight Sheni. I mean, it happens to be daylight Sheni, but that's not what I mean. I'm giving you a calendar location, if you like. So over here, so that's a slightly different connotation to the word bayom, on the day. Here, the connotation the Gemara prefers is bayom, on the first day. That means every day, including Shabbos. I shouldn't say every first day. I mean every day, including Shabbos, if it's on the first day. That's what I really mean. So bayom means it should be every day. Why might I thought it would not be every day? Might I thought it'd be every 2 days, every 3 days? Very strange. But we'll see later, this is a bit of a package with one of the later lines of the drasha, because in itself, just to say bayom means on each day of Sukkot, seems to be stating the obvious, and it doesn't really fit in very well with the word bayom anyway. So we find some of the derivations over here a little bit difficult to follow, but this is the one which the Brisa gives. Rishon, it says bayom harishon, and here we're breaking up the word into two. That's why I've redded the hay and I've beiged, or whatever it was, the bit rishon, because they're going to be taken as separate parts. The word rishon without the hay means everywhere on the first day. As we know, in the Chutz Loretz, we also take it on the first day. That's Minat Torah in Chutz Loretz. In the Beis HaMikdash, it was in Minat Torah on the first day and all the other 6 other days. But certainly on the first day, it is universal in location. How does the word Rishon demonstrate that it is universal on location? Very difficult. I can't answer that question, because Rishon means first. It doesn't mean everywhere. If the posuk had said b'chol makom, then it would be ideal, but it doesn't. It says Rishon. So the commentaries try to say that because it says Yom Rishon, but there's no, what's the word? There's no modification anywhere in the posuk to suggest otherwise. It's unqualified. It means on the first day. This is a universal rule. And if it's a universal rule, it means everywhere around the world has a mitzvah of taking lulav and esrog on the first day. So that's how they would understand this rather head-scratching derivation from the word rishon. And finally, the ha of the rishon. In other words, on the first day, not on a first day, but on the first day. When you say the, now here's a connotation that may be a little bit clearer. It usually narrows things down, right? If you say I'm going to put something down on a table, it means any table that's around you is ideal for putting whatever object you have down, and you have no preference. If you say I'm going to put it down on the table, it means this table out of all other tables. I'm not telling you anything rocket science over here, but when you look at Gemara, you have to be prepared to think on those terms as well. They're not just put there for, it's not just a general chatter of the posset. There's something very specific, and the definite article is very specific. So when it says ha, it means we need to reduce the number of occasions that you might take it. You might take lulav and esrog in some way. It's not going to be in every single possible day of Sukkot. So here, the Gemara's qualification, the narrowing down, is you only take it on Shabbat if Shabbat falls on the first day. That narrows down the number of days which you take in it. You would take it on Shabbat, but only if it's on the first day. So it's a bit of a package with Bayom. You take it every day, including Shabbat. And now we're learning that that comes to restrict it to say that only if Shabbat falls on the first day. Now this is the drasha that the Bryce is bringing over here. The only thing it really wanted to bring it for is to teach you this, that there is a mitzvah to take lulav and esrog everywhere in the world, even outside, even what's called bigvulin, outside the Beis Hamikdash on the first day, because it says Rishon and it doesn't qualify it. Not at all clear. But it's that line actually that we brought the brisa for, and we've learned everything else en passant because it's a brisa that learns all these different things. If you're finding this brisa a bit difficult, or rather, if you're finding the blow-by-blow derivations of each phrase somewhat distant and difficult, then it's not surprising. Very often we find that the drush of psukim, halachic drush, doesn't seem to accord very well with the literal translation of the verse. And that's the whole point about drush, by the way. If you want pshat, the simple meaning, then you'll translate it in a way which, King James's translators might have translated. If you want to expound the verse further, then you're going to have to look below the surface. Nevertheless, it does remain quite a difficult drasha. And in general, there's an argument, it's certainly a moot point, whether the verses and the individual drashot brought to extract halachot are the source of those halachot, or whether the halachot were there and these drashot, those verses, are brought after the event as a mnemonic or as a demonstration that those halachot which would have been done anyway are sensibly based on the verses in the Torah. That's quite a subtle argument. Again, and it's a philosophical argument. Whether or not, when you see these derivations initiated the halachot, as they were, or whether the halachot were there anyway, and these demonstrations was to show that the Torah verses support it. And there are two different types of scholarship on this, and they're always at war on each other. Some will say, why was this brought by the Chazal? It's obviously this is the way they're learning. They're learning Torah Shabbal pairs to extract the information, and therefore the halachot came as a result of these verses. Others will say that there might have been a Maseres to do this anyway for different reasons, and Chazal wanted to show after the event how you can fit it into those verses. It's quite a heated argument, but if you're finding it difficult to see how the extraction of each halacha is made from each phrase, then you can take the other approach to say that the halachot were there and known, and then this phrase was used in a way to demonstrate that those halachot are well grounded. Okay, that was the brisa. Now the Gemara says, Amama. Let me just stop sharing. Okay, the Gemara now says, Amamar, the master said, every time the Gemara says Amamar, the master said, it's a nice expression, isn't it? It's referring to one of the statements in a Mishnah or a Brisa that we've just learned, because the Amoraim, if you like, when they're discussing this in the Beis HaMidrash, they are showing their kovod to the Tanoim, who they quoted in the Brisa by saying, the master said. The statement in the Brisa is a statement of one of the masters, one of the Tanoim. What statement are we looking at? By Yom, Ba'afilu b'Shabbos. That by Yom means, as we saw, one of those derivations was that when it says by Yom, it means even if that day is on the Shabbos. Now we say it's only the first day, that would be Doche Shabbos, and not if Shabbos fell on another day. But if it was the first day, you would take it, even if that first day is Shabbos, right? Sensible. But the Gemara doesn't know why the Torah should tell us this. Again, some of these are background questions you would have had probably. Says the Gemara, why should I think that if we've got a 7-day mitzvah of taking Arba Minim, that on Shabbos we would leave it out? Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't be a 7-day mitzvah, would it? I mean, if the Torah says you should take it for 7 days, why would I leave it out if it was Shabbos? And the Torah is telling you, according to this drasha, be careful, don't miss Shabbos out. If it falls on the first day, you take it on Shabbos as well. Says the Gemara, why was God worried to let us know this, that you have to take Lulav and Esrog even on Shabbos? What would have been the alternative view that you wouldn't take it on Shabbos? Where would that have been? There is no need for the posuk to tell you something if it's not needed. We're not talking about a later extraction of a paragraph from a law book. The Torah tells you something that is needed. If it's obvious that you take it even on Shabbos because it's a 7-day mitzvah, then why would I have thought otherwise that the Torah would need to correct me? So the Gemara explains why it has a problem. Mirte tilto ba'almahu. Itzrich kral and mishrei tilto. This is a question. Tiltul here means muktzah. We did this briefly last time. The Gemara feels that the only problem with taking lulav and esrog, let's not talk about for a moment carrying it through the street. Let's talk about the actual act of taking lulav and esrog itself. What could be the only Shabbos prohibition that you'd be violating if you took lulav and esrog on Shabbos? So the only thing you could possibly make up is muktzah. Do you remember I said that since lulav is a branch and the myrtle is leaves, you're not supposed to touch trees and it's come off the tree, then maybe you could say that anything off a tree in your hands is muktzah. So you want to tell me that maybe that's why the Torah says take it even on Shabbos, to let you know that even though there is a din of muktzah, don't worry about muktzah, you need to take it anyway. Says the Gemara, stupid, that can't be the case. Because muktzah is d'Rabbanan. Muktzah is a much later rabbinical enactment that prevents us from violating further by touching stuff for which we have no use on Shabbos. Very nice. But it was never a mitzvah in our Torah. The Torah nowhere says, nor is there a drasha from the Torah that suggests there is such a thing as muktzah. Therefore, why should the Torah have come to specifically warn you to take it on Shabbos as well, if there was no reason not to take it on Shabbos? And muktzah is not a reason not to take it on Shabbos from the Torah's point of view, because the Torah predates the enactment of muktzah. So why should the Torah bother to tell you? So the Gemara gives you an answer over here, which is an interesting technicality. Amar Rava, you're right. As far as the muktzah is concerned, there'll be absolutely no need. Why does the Torah then tell us that we need to take lulav and esrog even on Shabbos? What is the thought that you shouldn't be able to? Says the Gemara, lo nitzracha ela machshirei lulav. The reason the Torah is telling you take it even on Shabbos is not so much to tell you that you can take lulav and esrog on Shabbos, but to expand it even to all the preparatory tasks to lulav that are needed to prepare your lulav and esrog, that they can also be done on Shabbos if it's the first day of Sukkot. What are the examples of that? So the Rishonim say when you bind your lulav and esrog if you're binding it, and if you can make a knot around it, or you're putting the leaves in and doing various things, there are various preparatory acts of the lulav and esrog, which you could say are osir and Shabbos and violations. So you might have thought, all right, I can take lulav and esrog on Shabbos because it's a 7-day mitzvah and the Torah doesn't need to tell me anything about mitzvah, but I have to do all my preparatory acts on the Friday. And I got to do my binding and getting it all ready and putting the stuff in the pouches so I can just take it out on Shabbos and do it. I might have thought that. And I should not do those preparatory works, processes on Shabbos itself, because those are preparatory to the mitzvah, not the mitzvah itself. What is the mitzvah? The mitzvah is to take lulav and esrog in hand, make a bracha, do a few shakes, and that's it. There is no mitzvah that says prepare your lulav and esrog. Obviously, you need to have prepared lulav and esrog, otherwise you haven't got a lulav and esrog. But that is not part of the mitzvah. That's what's called machshirei mitzvah. You know what a machshir is? It's an enabler, E-N-A-B-L-E-R. It enables the mitzvah. When something's kosher, it enables you to be able to eat it, machshir. So this machshir, it enables the mitzvah. So the Gemara is now coming up with an interesting technicality, that the only reason the Torah needs to tell you that lulav and esrog can and should be taken even on Shabbos is not to tell you about the mitzvah itself, which is obvious, but when it says take it on Shabbos means and even do those preparatory acts of enabling that you might have wanted to do on Friday. You don't need to worry about that. Friday, you're thinking maybe you should do your binding of your lulav and esrog because you don't want to do it tomorrow. So you can do it tomorrow, because since it is an enabler for the mitzvah, an enabler is like part and package of the mitzvah itself, and that's the reason why the Torah tells you it's the chiddush of the enabling and not the chiddush of doing the mitzvah itself. And the Gemara says, because this is an opinion which is part of machlokas, a broader machlokas in Shas, whether enabling a mitzvah is to be considered part of the mitzvah itself, or whether the enabling is not part of the mitzvah, which has consequences if you're doing a mitzvah on Shabbos, where the enabling process is itself possibly a violation. Let's have another look. Eliva Dehai Tana. It goes according to that Tana, and that Tana is Rabbi Eliezer. And we'll see in a moment, the Tanya. The Gemara brings a brisa, it's a brisa in Masechet Shabbos, Eliezer de Mela, where Rabbi Eliezer has his own view against all of the rest of the sages. That the brisa says here, lulav v'chol machshirav dochin es haShabbos. This is Rabbi Eliezer. He says the lulav, and I'm talking about when they used to do this at the time of the Beis Hamikdash, the lulav and all those things that are necessary to put the lulav together, even if they would not normally be done on the Shabbos, dochin es haShabbos, they push the Shabbos aside. That is, that they may be done on the Shabbos, divrei Rabbi Eliezer. But the Chachamim doesn't say over here, the Chachamim disagree. They disagree with absolutely. And was my Tama, so why does Rabbi Eliezer say that you can even do the enabling? Damakra, bayom v'afil b'Shabbos. He will be part of that drasha who says that the word bayom, which means even on Shabbos, comes to tell you that that's to include even the enabling. Now, I said this is part of something larger. In Masechet Shabbos, it's brought in relation to bris milah. Bris milah has to be done by Yom HaShmini, even on Shabbos. As we know, we go to a bris on the Shabbos as well. Now, the actual bris itself is Doche Shabbos. That itself is a chiddush. That itself is a chiddush. Why? Because you're going to let off blood by definition. And you're not supposed to let blood deliberately on Shabbos. Right? You're not allowed to wound on Shabbos, not allowed to shecht on Shabbos. So how can you do bris milah on Shabbos? The answer is, the Torah says, it says by Yom HaShmini, it means that there are no exceptions to doing it on the 8th day if the baby's ready on the 8th day, obviously. There are no exceptions. Even on Shabbos, it overrides Shabbos. That's why you don't need to worry about the violation of cutting into the skin on Shabbos, even though it causes a wound. However, what about the preparatory stuff? What about the Gemara talks about the ismol, the blade that the mower's going to use? Now, the mower's walking a long way, and he usually has his own equipment. Can he bring that blade with him through a Rishus Harabim, through a street, a public thoroughfare, on Shabbos, on the way to the Yeled, on the grounds that it is a machshir? It's an enabling for him. He can't do the bris without his blade. Or do we say that that's not Doche Shabbos? He knows he's going to do a bris on Shabbos. He should jolly well bring his blade on Friday afternoon to the home of the Yeled, and then he'll do the bris. But he shouldn't carry it through the streets because that's not the mitzvah. He's not doing any bris milah while he's walking through Shari Chesed. It's only when he reaches his destination that he'll be doing the bris. That is the basic machlokas there between Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim. Rabbi Eliezer says that not just the mitzvah itself, but all the preparatory acts are also considered to be part and parcel of the mitzvah, and they may be doche Shabbos. The Moel doesn't have to worry about carrying the blade in his pocket at all. And here, likewise, when it comes to the lulav, the person doing the mitzvah doesn't have to worry about doing all the binding on the Friday afternoon. You can do it on Shabbos as well. Chachamim say no. Chachamim say no. The Moel, and we pass them, by the way, not like Rabbi Eliezer, but like the Chachamim, that really everything you can do before Shabbos, you should do before Shabbos. But that which you can't do on Shabbos for the mitzvah, and if the mitzvah has to be done, you do that on Shabbos, obviously, but not those bits you can do in advance. But over here, we're picking up on Rabbi Eliezer's opinion, and Rabbi Eliezer holds that even a machshiri mitzvah are doche. That's what's going on over here. Okay, so the Gemara has now explained what the need was for the posuk to say by Yom, even on a Shabbos. Even on a Shabbos means, according to Rabbi Eliezer, you can even do the preparatory acts needed for your lulav and esrog before Shabbos, even though you could have done them on Friday afternoon, but you can do them on Shabbos. As I say, not our halacha, but nevertheless the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, and we find it brought in other places as well, where there is a preparatory stage as well as the mitzvah itself. Says the Gemara. Okay, so now the Gemara has a problem, because if it's true that the opinion in the Brisa that says by Yom means that you can even take the do the preparatory stuff for the lulav and esrog on Shabbos, not just the mitzvah itself. And this is Rabbi Eliezer's opinion, because Chachamim don't hold the same. They argue. Says the Gemara, the Rabbanon, hi by Yom, my delay. So what are the Chachamim who don't agree with Rabbi Eliezer? How are they going to learn the word by Yom? In other words, they also have a word here, by Yom, a phrase which is emphatic. Rabbi Eliezer is using this word by Yom to teach the din that even if this is on Shabbos, you can do all the preparatory acts. The Chachamim don't hold of that halacha, so they're left with the word by Yom with no particular significance, and the Gemara doesn't like that. The Gemara says, okay, Rabbi Eliezer is making use of Bayom to teach a halacha. What halacha are the Chachamim going to be teaching from the word Bayom? You might say, well, it's pretty obvious. The word just means on the day, but that's not the way the Gemara works. The Gemara is always looking to extract significance. Remember that. So what are they doing then? So the Gemara says they also make use of the Bayom. Miboile, they need it to teach us the following halacha, which is the one I did mention in passing before, which is the obvious one. Bayom v'lo balayla. When you take your lulav and esrog, particularly us as well, in Chutz La'aretz or even Eretz Yisrael, outside the Beis HaMikdash, where we only have a mitzvah one day, it has to be done during the day. You can't do your mitzvah of taking lulav and esrog the night before when you've benched Yom Tov. Neither can you do it after sunset, really, on the day of the first day. You've missed the day. You have to do it during daylight. That's what Bayom means. It's the most obvious and basic meaning of Bayom, nothing more complicated than that. It's to teach us the halacha that it has to be done by day. But now the Gemara's got the problem with Rabbi Eliezer, because Rabbi Eliezer is using Bayom to teach us the halacha that even those preparatory acts can be done if they fall on a Shabbos. You can do those as well. When he's using this phrase Bayom for a particular halacha, it gets used up, and he now doesn't have it for any other halachas. This is a basic rule. You use a phrase to expound a halacha. You can't use, there are exceptions. You generally don't use the same phrase to expound a whole package of different halachas. So once Rabbi Eliezer has used it just to teach you that you can even do the preparatory acts on a Shabbos for a lulav and esrog. He has not got that phrase ready to avail himself for it, to teach you by Yom V'lo by Laila. So does that mean the Rabbi Eliezer holds you can take the lulav by night? Because he's not using it for the purposes by day and not by night. He's using it for a different reason. So how does he know? If he does hold this way, how does he know that you don't take the lulav by night? By Yom V'lo by Laila min Na'aleh. From where would he learn? Where does Rabbi Eliezer learn that it can be taken only by day? So the Gemara answers, it's got an alternative. Nafka Leili Sefer Dekra. He learns it from the end of the verse, where it says, we've read this and heard it before. Usamachtem lifnei Hashem Elokeichem shiv'as yomim. Yomim v'lo leilos. Very simple. Because at the end of the verse, it says, although this is referring to the Beis HaMikdash, but it's the same topic really of the festival of Shavuos. You shall celebrate Lifnei Hashem Elokeichem. It says Shiv'as Yomim, and Yomim will be Yom below Laila. So he will know very clearly from that it's day and not night, and he doesn't have a problem therefore even if he doesn't have Bayom to teach him that, which the Chachamim do, he will learn it from the end of the pasuk where it says Yomim. You should all be finding this really quite mysterious and difficult. I mean, I find this mysterious and difficult, but obviously you're obviously a lot more on the ball than I am, because no one's pressed the buzzer 100 times to say that. What alternative does the Torah have for the use of certain language? If it wants you to say that you keep a mitzvah for 7 days, surely it has to say something like Shivas Yomim. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's not nighttime as well. What other expression can it use? You're not supposed to divine, without any prompt that it's a 7-day Yom Tov. You're going to say Shivas. So what are you going to say after Shivas? Shivas something, you've got to say Yomim. So the word Yomim is simply there to tell you it's a 7-day mitzvah. And if it's simply there to tell you it's a 7-day mitzvah, what are we trying to say by Yomim v'lo b'leila? Since it says by Yomim, it means only in the daytime and not at nighttime. If it's got no alternative expression, then how can you say that's what the Torah means you to derive from that? And you could ask for that on some of the other droshes as well. It's all very well making this but not that, but if it's the only word the Torah can use, surely you cannot gain that extra information from it. I guess there are it's a question I can't answer really in many situations. Over here, I guess the Torah could have written Usamachtim lifnei Hashem Elokeichem shavua echad, 1 week. Yeah, and he wouldn't have to use the word Yomim. And I would have known it was a 7-day Yom Tov. And then it would have been maybe you could have done it day and night. Shavua Echad doesn't talk about a week. A week could be 24 hours all the way through. Since the Torah doesn't write Shavua Echad, but says Shivas Yomim, then we have this emphasis of the word Yomim, which could have been otherwise phrased. So we say the word Yom becomes significant. What does it mean, Yomim? Why does it say Shivas Yomim, not Shavua? Because it wants you to think about this. Yom v'lo Laila. And that's the way Rabbi Eliezer would learn it. Okay. I hope I've answered a question that you might have had or should have had, but it isn't always so easily answered. Generally speaking, when we're looking at the drasha of Chazal, we're looking at them trying to extract information from a phrase. Usually that phrase has a straightforward meaning, but there's something that Chazal see, that our rabbis saw in the phrase, which suggests that there's something going on below the surface. And then they try to extract what it is that's going on below the surface. It becomes more difficult if the word that you're looking at is needed simply to teach you something, the very basest and most obvious rule. Then it's difficult to say, well, if there's no alternative, then maybe it isn't coming to teach you anything other than the simplest thing. So you've got to look to see whether it could have been expressed differently. And if it could have been expressed differently, but it's expressed this way, then you've got to ask yourself, why was it expressed this way? This is the way you learn Gemara, really. This is the way the Gemara learns Gemara. And to follow the Gemara, you have to really place yourself in that frame of mind. Okay, I'm going to do something a little bit naughty over here, if you don't mind. I'm going to do a little bit of skipping until we get to the next Omid, towards the top of the next Omid, because what happens now is the Gemara goes around in a number of intricate circles and ends up exactly where it is now. So I could take you through another half an hour or so of backs and forths where the Gemara says, what about this? What about this? What about that? What about that? None of them are really accepted and don't change the meaning of the Gemara. So we're going to do a little skip for the final 15 minutes. And we're going to move on to, if you took from me both sheets I included, we're moving on to the second sheet. If you have your own Gemara, then it's the third line from the top, after the two dots. The last word on the third line from the top, this is Mem Gimel Amud Beis, is Arava. Right? Here we're moving on from Lulav and Esrog, which we've sort of exhausted quite well, really. What was done in Beis HaMikdash, what was done in the outside the Beis HaMikdash, the problems of Shabbos, etc., etc. And we're moving on now to this mitzvah of the Arava. Do you remember I gave you a picturesque introduction? I'll just take you back there quickly for a change of scenery. Share screen. I brought you these wonderful pictures. Was it earlier on? Was it later on? Here we are. Oh, you remember this beautiful picture. I explained to you that there was a mitzvah of Arava that was done 7 days in the Mikdash. This is not the Aravot that we take, but something a bit more picturesque. It was done in the Beis HaMikdash only. It wasn't done by the masses. We have a pale imitation of it now when we go around the bimah to do Hoshanas and Hoshana Rabbah. But the actual mitzvah of Arava, which we will take to be perhaps a halacha l'Moshe Sinai, having Sinaitic tradition, even though it's not specifically explained in the Chumash, was one that the evening before, if you like, let's talk about the first day of Sukkot, the evening before, or the afternoon before, the workers of the Beis HaMikdash would go down towards the valley in Motza, if you remember, just outside Yerushalayim. They would pick up some fabulously long Arava branches, and they would bring them to the Beis HaMikdash precincts. And in the morning of the first day of Yom Tov, and in subsequent days as well, and here you can see this enormous sort of branch. It looks like it could have been from a large tree, but in fact, these are very, very long Aravot. They were placed alongside the side of the Mizbeach, and they would hang over. And then all the Kohanim only, because we're here talking about in the Azara, where only the Kohanim could be found, they would make hakofos with trumpets and flutes around the Mizbeach, which had these overhanging Aravas. And that was the mitzvah of Arava. And that was done for 7 days. And the Mishnah said something strange about that. That could also be done 6 days or 7 days. It was done on Shabbos to make it 7 days only, and this is the opposite to Lulav and Esrog, if the 7th day, if Shabbos fell on the 7th day. If Shabbos fell on the 7th day, it was done on Shabbos as well. If Shabbos fell on any other day of Sukkot, that day of Shabbos, it was not done. It was done only on 6 days. Remember, on Lulav and Esrog was the other way around. That is, that Lulav and Esrog only pushed away Shabbos on the first day, whereas on Arav, for the Arava, and we'll see why much later on, the Arava pushed away Shabbos on the 7th day only, if Shabbos was on the 7th day. So if Shabbos on the 7th day would have been taken for 7 days, this mitzvah. If Shabbos on any other day would be done for 6 days, because Shabbos always falls somewhere, obviously, within any 7-day period. So the Gemara is now referring to this particular mitzvah. Says the Gemara now, Arava Shiva Ketzad, the Mishnah actually asked this question, and what circumstances does the Arava get taken all 7 days? And the Gemara answer, Mishnah said, under the circumstances of the seventh day is Shabbos, then it's taken all seventh day. So the Gemara asked the question then, Arava by Yom Hashvi'i, my Tama Dochya Shabbos. Why is it that we say that the seventh day, Arava, is Doche Shabbos? What's the question over here? The question really is that it shouldn't be Doche Shabbos because there are problems with the Arava. Because remember, we said originally that if Shabbos fell on any other day during Sukkot, as far as the Lulav Nesser is concerned, they wouldn't take it because of this Gezerah D'Rabba. Maybe people will come to carry it in the street. So maybe we should be worried about carrying in the street. Maybe the Aravas will be paraded through the street on Shabbos itself, something like that. So it should never be taken on a Shabbos, the Gemara says. The Gemara holds that even though there may in fact be a theoretical mitzvah to take it all 7 days, but in the same way as we are worried about taking Lulav and Esrog on Shabbos other than the first day, we're worried about taking it because we might come to carry it. We should be worried about allowing the mitzvah Arava on the seventh day because we might come to carry the Arava through the street. Why is it we're not worried? Why is it that this mitzvah of Arava is carried on even on Shabbos when it falls on the seventh day? So Amar Rabbi Yochanan, the Gemara gives an extraordinary answer over here. So Rabbi Yochanan answers, Kadei lefarsama, in order to publicize it, shehi min haTorah, that it is from the Torah. A stunning reason. It's a sort of irony. You know what it is? When it comes to the Arava, the Gemara wants to say, it is not clearly written in the Torah that there is this mitzvah, which I depict over here, to do this ceremony. And therefore, since it's not clearly mentioned, there would be many who think that it's been a rabbinic invention. And in order to make clear that this is not a rabbinic invention, we do it even on Shabbos on the seventh day, to show, because we would never, if it were a rabbinic invention, we would never do it on a Shabbos, because we wouldn't take the risk of a violation of Shabbos just in order for a rabbinic ceremony of Arava to be carried out. The fact that we carry out over Shabbos is a declaration that this must be a mitzvah min haTorah. So by doing it on the seventh day, even if it falls on Shabbos, it's like setting up a banner in the street and saying, hey, this proves that this is a mitzvah min haTorah. The obvious question is, why don't we do it on the first day or the second day to show, whichever day you would have taken to do it, if Shabbos fell on it, would also be a demonstration. The Gemara will ask later. For the time being, the Gemara is saying there's something special about the seventh day, but there are many people who don't believe that there is such a mitzvah Arava. And in order to prove it, that we consider this to be a mitzvah min haTorah, we deliberately set aside the fear of carrying through the streets, which bothered us with the Lulav and Esrog, and we take it even on a Shabbos if it falls on the seventh day, to demonstrate that we Chachamim hold that it is a mitzvah min haTorah. Now the Gemara is going to ask in a moment. The Gemara is going to kick it on the other one. So what about Lulav as well? We're going to go back to Lulav. But I'm going to try and get a little bit more into the whole question of what it is we're afraid of that we needed to publicize this to people. Who are we trying to deny? We're obviously trying to deny a school of thought that the mitzvah of Arava is not a Torah mitzvah. And who would have that school of thought? Is this Reform? Is this liberal? Is this Reconstructionist? Were there such people at the time? I mean, surely if you were a Torah-believing Jew, you were a Torah-believing Jew. If you weren't, you weren't. And that was it. So who are we trying to set aside over here by making this public demonstration? We are going to do it on Shabbos in order to make it clear that we hold this to be an enactment min haTorah. So the answer is the Gemara later on will explain, but it'll take a while before we get there. The Gemara says later on, we're worried about the Baitusim. The Baitusim and the Tzedukim, you know the Tzedukim better, the Sadducees. The Baitusim were really another subsect, very much like that of the Tzedukim, who didn't believe in Torah Shabbal Peh. And they believed only in what was Mefurish min Torah. And of course, they caused lots of problems with the Jews in subsequent generations. They also came from Kohanic descent. Baitus and Sodok were Kohanim. And there's an August Rabbi Nosson that talks a little bit about how they came into being, where they started from. But they became very influential. And Chachamim were set against these influential Tzedukim and Baitusim. And the Baitusim would scoff at the mitzvah of Arava. And they would say, well, where does it say in the Torah this Arava? You're bringing these great big bushes over from Mozart for? It's a laugh. We understand Lulav and Esrik, Arba Minim. It says Arba Minim, okay, we'll do Arba Minim. But where's this coming from? Yet Chazal had tradition. And according to one view, it even comes from the way we read Psukim. I think the majority view is that this is a halacha l'Moshe Sinai. In order to protect its significance, Chazal needed to make a very public act, and that was to allow you to take this to be done even on Shabbos, because this is a declaration for sages who had control of the Beis Hamikdash to some extent, were demonstrating that they believed in halacha l'Moshe Sinai, and they did not believe in the skeptics amongst the Baitusim and the Tzedukim. There would have been a lot of tension because some of the Kohanim and some of the Kohanim Gedolim themselves may have been Tzedukim. So we're dealing with a very difficult situation. There would have been tensions within the Beis Hamikdash between the two sides, between the Pharisees, who were the halachic decisors, and the Kohanim were actually carrying out a lot of these ceremonies themselves. Well, some of the Kohanim, wouldn't be unfair to say all the Kohanim. Certainly there were schools of Kohanim. There would have been Tzedukim and Baitusim. And maybe next week we'll start off perhaps by going through a short August Rabbi Nosson, which gives at least the midrashic beginnings of the schools of Baitus and Sodok, which became the Baitusim and the Tzedukim. But the reason the Gemara brings it over here is to explain why they insisted that the ceremony of Arava be done on the seventh day, even though it was Shabbos, and even though there's a risk of violation, which worried us with Lulav and Esrik. Over here, it was so important to demonstrate that this procedure of the Arava was Torah sanctioned, that they put aside any one of those fears. There's always you have to weigh things out one against the other. There is a fear of violation, but at the same time, there's a terrible fear that people will accept the views of the Tzedukim. And in order to put that fear aside, the ceremony was carried out even on Shabbos. Okay, we'll close it now, and I'll go on next week, and we'll just start from that little thing Arava again and take it through. The Gemara has some interesting observations that we'll be dealing with next week as well. So let me just quit sharing and stop recording. If I can find the button.